This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online, but more on them later. So not knowing where to start with ancient texts can be quite daunting, particularly if you never came across them at school before. As such, the image that you may have of them in your head may be rather elaborate, as though these ancient tomes are densely packed, challenging to read, and even harder to follow. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I found The Fairy Queen harder to read than any ancient text I've come across, and I was an adult when I started reading ancient texts. I was never taught any ancient history or classics at school, so I didn't start reading any until I went to university to study classics. So I decided to put together a video for anyone who's curious but not entirely confident with their ability to get their head around the ancient text, so to speak. And I hope this video will help you pick out books that meet your curiosities and desires. Now, I should stress that I only specialise in Greco-Roman history, so these texts are primarily reflecting that area of interest, but I hope it gives some kind of generic guidance on picking up translations and editions, which I hope can be useful for anyone wanting to read ancient or classic texts outside of that region. So I covered this a little bit in my Iliad video about reading the Iliad, but let's talk about the elephant in the room again, which is translations. Because I'm guessing that if you haven't read any ancient texts before, then you're probably not going to be reading them in the ancient languages. As Eve Freeman highlights in her essay on the topic, according to the Anglo-American pedagogical tradition, translations are generally considered to be the inferior version of the original text, with translations only providing an understanding of the content of the text of a macro level, but falling short by lacking the style and substance of the original text. Now, whilst that is the general consensus of the field, please don't let it deter you from reading ancient texts at all in translation, as I rather believe that reading the text in translation is one of the core driving principles inspiring people to learn ancient languages, rather than the other way round. And even if you don't want to learn an ancient language, you can get a lot from knowing about these stories and the allusions with them throughout history, the literary canon, society and culture. So learning about the stories in any format is an enriching experience in of itself, regardless if it's close to the original text. That being said, the translation you choose is really important, and this is where I would recommend always reading the first page or two of a text in person, or a translation online, before you commit to purchasing it or borrowing it. Translations can completely transform how you understand or feel about a text. For example, many years ago, I read The Master and Margarita and I absolutely hated it. And whilst I was ranting about it, how much I despised this book to my then bookshop manager, who I worked with, who loved the book, he suggested I should maybe got a bad translation. And I was like, no, it can't be that extreme, surely, really. Turns out it can be. I felt like I read a completely different book entirely when I read a different translation. Because all translators are artists in themselves, they're not just translating the word beat for beat. Translators all have their unique spin on a text and their own style. Some translators convert verse and prose kind of close to modern language, whilst others are truly products of their time. They bring in incredibly archaic language to the text, which didn't exist in the ancient text at all. That vibe is not there. And on top of that, translators often include their own biases, which dictates what words they use, such as for figures of Helen of Troy, who has been called a horrid dame, bold hussy, a nightmare of a woman, a slut, a whore, a bitch, and a nasty bitch, and a cold-blooded bitch, by many male translators, but the term isn't there in the ancient text, and translators such as Emily Wilson have chosen the term dog-faced. It'll be a really exciting time when more diverse translators exist on the scene, as I believe diversity of experience and perspectives can only enrich how we read and understand ancient texts. But some translators, such as Maria Headley, whose translation of Beowulf is entirely modern, have managed to create truly phenomenal and beloved pieces of work, which stand up and are highly regarded with the more traditional translations. So when picking a translation, there is no right answer, it's entirely down to your preferences. Do you want to read a more literal academic translation which focuses on accuracy, or a more poetic accessible translation which prioritises readability? I'll give my translations as I go along through the video, but keep in mind that you may prefer something a little different. But before I go further into the rest of the recommendations, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place and all on your terms. I've gone through many iterations online, from blogging to running a business, and Squarespace has seen all sides of my online evolution. I'm currently working on my first of 3 writing workshop courses, and courses that I will sell on my Squarespace website, which allows me to sell members only content for my community, and I can sell one-off access to online courses, blogs, videos and memberships. And purchases can be anything from one-time fees to subscription fees, whatever works for your business. And when it comes to evolving my business, I can make smarter business decisions with Squarespace's intuitive built-in analytics tools, which lets me review my website traffic, learn where to focus on the engagement, and track revenue from bookings, invoices, or products that I sell, all from one place. So if you're interested, then check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, I noticed there are certain publishers which appeal to me in lots of different departments. For example, Oxford World Classics are great for Greek lyric poetry, but I tend to return to Penguin for philosophy, history and Roman poetry. For a beginner, you can't really go wrong with Oxford World Classics or Penguin. They're kind of really accessible and really enjoyable versions of the texts. But there are many other repeatable publishers out there who are doing fantastic work in translation, so please make sure you check those out too. So now getting into the nitty-gritty of the text, here are 7 texts I would recommend for anyone wanting to read the ancient classics for the first time. The first one is nice, easy and tiny, Hesiod's Theogony, Works and Days. If you're incredibly keen about ancient literature because you have a fascination with mythology, Hesiod's Theogony is the place to start. This is the quote-unquote original source of many myths that we know them today. Obviously I say original in quotation marks because there's no such thing as the original myth, at least that we have access to in written tradition. It's a very short read, as you can see, and it's about the origins and genealogies of the Greek gods, and it was composed circa 730 to 700 BCE. This translation that I have is by M.L. West, but I'm actually really interested in reading more recent translations by A.E. Stallings, which I haven't got. It came out, I say recently, it's like 6 years old now, but let's face it, every year since 2019 has sort of blurred into one big blob of nothing. Sticking on the same theme for my mythological people, Apollonius's Argonautica. Now, if you've wanted to read classics because you're a fan of Ray Harryhausen's films, such as Jason and the Argonauts, then look no further than here. This is yet another crucial mythology story, which is sort of overlooked in these discussions, particularly in formal education, as it was never something that was on my required reading list at all, and I don't really know why. This is a Hellenistic epic that contrasts nicely with Homeric and Roman epics, whilst also serving some crucial backstory for other texts that I'll recommend in this video. Now, I have 2 translations of this text. This one I haven't read. I have one by Richard Hunter and one by Aaron Puchkin. This is the Aaron Puchkin. Now, a lot of people are fans of Hunter's style, and they will say that Hunter is hands down best for accessibility. But I've heard that Puchkin's is far more readable of the two, as he's improved a lot about the English translation in many ways. So it depends again what you want. Hunter's is for more accuracy in terms of how close it is to the original text, whilst Puchkin's is more for readability. Now, we have to talk about Euripides. Euripides is Bacchae and Medea. So following on from the Argonautica, it only makes sense that we get into some Greek tragedy. If you've been playing with the classical reception field for the past few years, these 2 plays feature most heavily in contemporary culture, and they also feel the most relevant of recommendations to people who may be curious about reading Greek tragedy and love the themes of like dark academia, such as like The Secret History, or if you're into witchcraft, which obviously Medea, the original sorceress. I've done a whole video on Medea if you're interested. Now, there are so many translations of Euripides' plays, and that can be a little bit overwhelming. And what's really annoying is, I'm not sure if publishers have purposely done this, but if you go to, say, Oxford World Classics books, they tend to have Euripides' plays split in 2, and these 2 texts are never in the same text, never shall they twine in the same anthology, which is really irritating. I'm not sure if that's a marketing thing to make sure people buy 2 copies of a text. One way around this problem is I found them both in this particular text. I really enjoy the translations by Mary Lefkowitz and James Rom, and this is a huge anthology, but it's a bit of an expensive text, and I wouldn't want that to be a barrier to people. I have translations by Anne Carson and Rachel Cusk. Again, you cannot go wrong with it. However, when doing some researching, I see Aaron Poochigan has translated the Bacchae, but I haven't read it. But based on seeing only positive things about his translations, I can say other people have recommended it. Another great translation of Medea is John Davies' translation, and if you want a more conventional reading of the Bacchae, I also recommend Philip Vellacott. But for more unconventional ways, Anne Carson's translation is really up there. I couldn't see the front of the book, so I was like, that is the right one, right? It is. And again, I've listed all these books down below. A lot of them are with affiliate links. You are free to click on those links if you use them, but obviously just copy and paste the text for the book itself and the translation's name. So you don't have to feel free to use those, but if you want to, by all means, help a lady out by using her affiliate links. The next one I'm going to recommend is Livy's Histories, books 1 to 5. So if you want to read some history, I would recommend Livy's books. And yes, only books 1 to 5, as these will introduce you to the poetic accounts of Rome's mytho-history, from the tale of Romulus and Remus to the rape of Lucretia and the reign and the last king of Rome, which is Tarquinius Superbus. I think Livy's histories serve as a great primer for those who are interested in reading more ancient historical texts, as it demonstrates how amusingly history was written in the ancient world, and it sets up your expectations for reading Herodotus's histories and the Peloponnesian War. The only translation I have to recommend for this is the only one I've read, which is by T.J. Luce, and I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the others enough to point you in a different direction. Obviously, feel free to look around. I'm not going to miss this one out, I'm sorry. Let's talk about getting into the traditional expected texts of its metamorphoses, which, though it is a chunky boy, is probably the easiest to read of the epics in my opinion, and to get through because it's broken down into neat sections of mythology, and they aren't as dense as the cohesive narrative of epics such as the Aeneid or the Iliad. If you're someone who has enjoyed reading the mythological retellings from women's perspectives, or you love reading about myths in more detail, this is the text that you need. Though please keep in mind that if you're sensitive to sexual violence, take this one in a good headspace only. There was a lot of discussion many years ago about the inclusion of Ovid's texts in courses. Now, I personally think it's incredibly important text to read and confront and analyse it, but I'm biased as someone who researches about sexual violence a lot of the time, so take that with a grain of salt. The translation I started off with, as you can see, was David Rayburn's, but I also very much enjoy a newer translation by Stephanie McCarter, but it's quite expensive at the moment because I think it's still in hardback, even though it came out I think 2 years ago, so again, watch out for that price. Now the next one I can't actually physically show you because I don't own a copy of this. I only ever read it from the library, but I highly recommend it. Again, it is Plato's Symposium, because we can't talk about ancient texts without dipping into the world of philosophy. Now this book is set up as a Socratic dialogue, i.e. a set of speeches on the topic and discussion of being, eros, desire, but the dialogue is set up in a way that gives multiple perspectives from various ancient figures such as Aristophanes and Socrates and Pausanias. The translation that I read was Christopher Gill's translation, and it's rather wonderful. And I haven't ever seen another one or recommended it, so I can't suggest another. If you are someone who has read the Symposium in a different translation, please recommend yours down below if you prefer another version. And last but not least is Homer's Odyssey, because there is no escaping Homer. I chose the Odyssey over the Iliad, as the storytelling is far more simplistic to follow, and again easy to imagine considering the wealth of modern resources that lean on this material. And considering there are 2 films emerging in the next year, I think we just had one that came out, and we've got Nolan's coming out next year, so yeah. And there's so many retellings focusing on these figures from the Odyssey, from Circe to the Penelopiad, so this poem will probably give you more of a sense of cultural familiarity than the Iliad will, and it's easier to get lost in than the Iliad, in all honesty, and I say that as someone who preferred reading the Iliad. Now naturally, there are many translations of the Odyssey out there. I always think you can't really go wrong with Robert Fagles. He was the first one I came into reading. This is the one that I had when I was a wee little undergraduate. Look at my little notes, they're like from... That's so sweet. They're over a decade old, all these notes in here, when I was a little wee undergraduate. But also, I really love Emily Wilson's translation. Again, it's all down to personal preference upon reading the opening few lines of it. I think, technically, if I'm being honest, Fagles has the stronger opening, but I also prefer how Wilson's evolves, and it's a close call between the two, so there's nothing really to pick. Again, I can't say which one I prefer, if I'm being completely honest with you. Maybe just purely Fagles out of familiarity, but I like both of them. So again, pick up which one you will. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please let me know down below. Please leave a comment or a question. I have a Google Docs form where you can send in your requests if you want it to be a bit more specific and you don't want it to get lost in the comment section down below. Thank you as always to my patrons for making this possible. And thank you to my librarians. I have Marina, Jenny Edvane, Eric Taylor, Janice, Psycho Teddy, Fritz Anderson, Wee Lauren, Nicholas Reed and Andrea Bazil. Thank you so much for being my top tier Patreons. Please check out my podcast, The Annotated Mind, and I will see you soon for another video. And I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives. So keep reading.